Thank you for joining the first University of Maryland Search Master Speaker Series, where it's hosted by the Search Mastery Interest Group. And the Search Mastery Interest Group has been working on a number of projects over since the summer, and this is one of them. My name is Mary Ann Francis, and I'm a member of the Search Mastery Group, and I'm also an instructor at the iSchool. And it's my pleasure to introduce Dan Russell as our speaker today. Dan is Google's research scientist for search quality and user happiness. And he works in the area of search quality with a focus on understanding what makes Google users happy in their use of web search. Dan's a friend of the university, and he's well known in the journalism school for where he provides search training, and maybe some of you on the call today have been to one or two or more of his seminars over the years. He's also an iLead advisory board member and a longtime partner of the iSchool. Among Dan's many other accomplishments, he's also an author, and his book, The Joy of Search, was published last year, and I'll show you what it looks like as I have a copy, The Joy of Search. It's great. Today, Dan will be discussing his extensive experience with teaching online search and research skills at scale. Having said that, I'll turn it over to Dan so that he can share his experience and knowledge and the best practices of teaching online. And just to mention once more that the chat is available to the participants, and if you have questions, you can answer them. You can ask them in the Q&A. So Dan, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Very good, very good. I'm going to stop sharing your screen. I'm going to share my screen. We'll zip over there and start my preset. By the way, this talk is being recorded, and so I think if you want a copy of it or access to it, you talk to Sarah. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll share my contact information at the end, and they can contact me or
Good. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you. So I thought I'd talk today a little bit about what, to me, search mastery is all about, and what it means to go from zero to hero as a professional or a high quality or experienced or sophisticated searcher. Because, you know, the world is not made up of intuitively obvious search skills. So let's start by thinking about what search mastery means to me. And it means many things, but I'm going to give you 4 basic tenets. First off, search mastery means that you have an understanding of what's possible to do in research. That is, can you ask this kind of question? Can you look for this kind of data? Can you find supporting evidence for that? What does it mean to be able to do these kinds of things? So understanding what's possible in many ways determines competency level. That is, you understand what you can do. That's impossible, that's easy. Second aspect of search mastery, it's the ability to execute on what you know to be possible. That is, you can find information quickly, you can find it accurately, and you know how to do these things. You know how to make the search operators function. You know what resources are available. That is, you could actually execute. Third, and I was tempted to put this first, but I'm going to put third. It's the meta skill of knowing how to update your own search skill, research knowledge. So in essence, to be a really good searcher, to be a master of search, one of the things you need to know, one of the skills you have to have, is the meta skill, the autodidactic, the self-teaching gene, in order to stay up with what's going on in the field. Because, hey, one of the fundamental things about all search is whatever you know today is going to change or be gone next year. So pay attention, right? So this is a fundamental key part of search mastery. Fourth, it's of course the ability to critically reason about your domain of interest. So you can do all kinds of searches, but if you don't know what it is you're looking at or reading or understanding, you're stuck, my friend. So what we need to do is understand that search skill is embedded in a context of use. So you need to know something in order to get started. So there are strategies for getting yourself bootstrapped from the very beginning, but that's part of search mastery, right? So why do we care? What does it mean to be a search master? So one of the motivating factors for me is this chart. This is from OECD from a couple of years ago. It's still true today. They did a big study in 2007. They basically do it every year. But this is from 2017, and it basically shows the distribution of computer skills among basically people in the working population, okay? Now I'm showing you US and UK and so on, but here on the far left, look at the US. The top two bars, the green and the dark blue, are levels 3 and 4, strong and medium. Now the reason that's interesting is look at this. 70% of people who are knowledge workers in the US are at poor or below. That is across all of their computer skills, right? This is little basic things like being able to open a PDF file or being able to read your and access and act on your email. So this matters a lot because one of those fundamental skills is search. So this is an IDC study from just 2 years ago, estimating the amount of time that different knowledge workers spend on these different activities. You can see the big one here is reading and answering email. This is sort of the lingua franca of business, is that's the way it works. Or maybe it's Slack, but nevertheless, it's doing something with communications. The second biggest bucket here is searching and gathering information. That's what search mastery is all about. And it's 19% of the time that people spend working. It's basically a fifth of your work week is spent in search. Shouldn't you get better at it? Shouldn't this be something you know really well? So let's break this down a little bit. The basic skill for search mastery is knowing what's normal. So if you do a search, you do some kind of interrogation of the data set, you should realize what's normal. So here you probably recognize the blue links on the left-hand side as being normal, the inclusion of the top stories as being normal. But you notice that thing on the right? That's called a medical knowledge panel. This sort of lightly tealish color thing. Now, one thing to notice here is this is specialized information on the topic of your query, in this case, influenza. Notice that you query is influenza, but the knowledge panel is about flu. It did the coercion, it did the synonym expansion for you automatically. Now, I bring this up because that looks like normal, right? Part of being a search master is also understanding not only what's normal, but what is in the UI. Do you know how to read a UI, a search UI? So for example, here, you see on the upper left, overview, symptoms, treatments, and so on. Those are tabs that you can click on to get more information. Now, I know from our logs that not a lot of people click on symptoms, not a lot of people click on treatments, and fewer people click on specialists. Part of, I think, being a master and an effective user of search tools is knowing how to read the interface. We have conventions, we have these models, these patterns we follow. We try to make them consistent as we can, but it's up to you, the user, to understand a little bit of that. Now, we can do as much as we can with user interface design and make that as clear as possible, but you have to understand the conventions. Now, consider this is another search for COVID. This is different yet again. So this is not normal. You should, as a professional searcher, you should go, wait a second, what's going on here? There's a big red thing, upper left corner, COVID-19 alert. And below that are some more tabs, right? Horizontal tabs this time. Over the right-hand side, we have a different kind of knowledge panel. This one, a map of cases over the last 2 weeks. And there's links to the sources and et cetera, right? Let's dig into this a little bit more. So if you look just at that left sidebar where there are more tabs, you can click on those tabs to look at the statistics, and it looks like something like that, or the testing or whatever. So you have to understand as a user of these things, what's clickable, what's not clickable. Now, what's interesting here is you see the blue bar, the blue lozenge for it says overview. You have to understand that the things below it are other tabs. The tab outline is implied. That's a convention that Google uses. This is what it means to be a literate user of search interfaces, is you understand what's clickable, what's not, how to frame. What can you do? Remember that first search mastery point? What's possible? What's possible here? Well, one of the things you click on is that health info tab over there on the left, and you can get to a more tabbed interface, symptoms, prevention, breed treatments, and so on. Now, this is moving from searching into browsing, but a lot of people don't make a distinction to begin with, and they browse to search. So I think one of the things we are trying to do, and the entire field is trying to do, is anticipate your information need and allow the browsing behavior to bring that surface that very quickly. So let me back up and tell you a little bit about me. So my job at work is I'm a cyber, tribal, techno, cognitive anthropologist. And so what that fancy collocation of words means is that I think about how people use our technology, how they use Google search, how they use all of the plethora, the suite of Google tools that we offer. So, but I'm still a software engineer, I still have to write code, and I'm a research scientist. So I occupy this sort of interesting middle ground where everything's a boundary. Everything is in between, and I look at how people actually behave in the interstitial spaces of all these complex systems we've built. So part of what I do is I study and I watch how people themselves search. I do hundreds of studies. I teach hundreds of classes. I do lots of surveys. I have data from my online classes and on the orders of millions of data points. So I have a lot of background, both on what people actually do when they search, how to teach them, what works, and by the way, I know what doesn't work. So that's kind of what this whole talk will be about, is what have I learned? What do people know? What do people think about? So let's think about it. How did you learn how to search? Do you remember? Lots of younger students will say, oh, I don't know. I've always known how to search. It's like breathing, right? Well, not really. I will tell you how you learn how to search. You learned from friends, okay? I've got lots of data on this. The bottom line is most people, especially undergraduates coming in, have learned from friends. They never took a class on this. They never actually had detailed, organized instruction. Now, the good news is they also have learned a little bit from classes. There is a huge opportunity here, and I think that's what Search Mastery is all about. Can we organize effective classes and effective instruction so that you can become expert at doing all of these complex knowledge work? Another thing to note, people remember stories. I can talk to you about search theory until the cows come home, but you remember that story. And so I'm going to tell you some stories here, because I hope you'll remember these after this whole seminar is long gone. Now, the real question for me about search, and how do we teach it, is to understand how people think about search online in general. How do search engines work? So if you type in a query like this, what's the answer to life, the universe, and everything? What do you expect the answer to be? Right? Now, if you're deeply part of our culture, our Western European, slightly geeky techno culture, you will fully expect this answer, 42, right? If you don't understand this, you should go look it up. I'll just on your own time, pull out your phone, do it. Why is the answer to KS 42? Did you expect that? Was that in your mental model? So understanding users' mental model of search tools is fundamental for me. So how do people think about what a search engine does? Is it just all keywords all the way down? Is it somehow magical concepts? Is it machine learning stuff? What's in the index anyway? How do you know what's possible? How do you know what's normal? So what do people think? For example, how does it work? So I ask lots of versions of this question. I watch people doing searches all the time. And so I'll see people type in something like this, and this beautiful 3D animation pops up and they go, wow, that's fabulous. Did you expect that? A mental model is useful when it makes useful, valuable predictions and tells you what to do when things go wrong. Now, if you were looking for something else and you got this, then you would be really unhappy. We know from our data that this mostly is making people very happy because they didn't expect it. So user happiness comes about when you get an answer or a treatment of a result in a way that goes beyond what you expected. But understanding how people think about search engines is crucial for us. So for example, is this the kind of mental model that you have of Google? This construction, this tool, this technology, for the younger folks in the audience, this is called the card catalog. It was once upon a time used in libraries to organize the index to access books in the shelves, right? It has an implied ontology. It has a really deep categorization organization. You have to learn about how to use this, right? There's an access set of procedures. There's a certain set of understandings of what you can ask and cannot ask. For example, using this card catalog, you cannot search for an author of a book by middle name or by nickname, but I can do that on Google, right? So if you're thinking about Google this way, you're already fundamentally behind. Do you think about online content like this? Is your mental model of everything that's ever been published and ever filmed and ever written available online? Google Books has got a lot of stuff on it. It's got a big dose of this reality, but it's not everything. Do we think about things like this index in the back of my book? Is this what you're searching? When you type in, for example, conversions between units, do you jump to page 247? How does that work? When I ask people how Google works, they often will draw a picture like this. I've got a stack of 1,000 of these drawings. And here's one. This is actually pretty good, but it's by a computer science student who had written and actually built web crawlers. Now, what does the normal person do? What does the non-computer science student do? They often come back with illustrations like this. Now, it says at the top, several overlapping concentric circles, nonlinear Boolean targets. I have no idea what that means. I suspect they didn't know what it means either. But what this tells me is that there's this problem, this fundamental problem with the user model of Google. How do people think about these things? It's worth knowing that 1/3 of all these drawings have the word magic on them somewhere. Magic is basically you giving up. I don't know how it works. It's magic. That's a failure. That's a failure for us, okay? It shows that there's a real need in search mastery to get beyond the magic. How do we communicate that? How do we make this efficacious and useful for you? So, for example, if I type into Google this question, how old is Donald Trump's wife? First off, this is a natural language question, which would not have been a good query, say, 10 years ago, right? The word how would have been thrown out, is would have been thrown out, and all this stuff, right? But look, what happens when you do this now is you get 3 different answers. Did you imagine that? Yeah, in retrospect, you go, yeah, he's had 3 wives, whatever. But Google thinks about knowledge fundamentally differently than humans do. The expectation, if I asked you that question, you would say, oh, Melania is 49, or 50 now. What is the model here? How do you think? How does it think? So if I ask this question, what color is the sky? What do you expect? What does your mental model say? It's probably going to say it's blue, and that'll be fine. But what about this? How about the color of the sky on Mars? Is that in the knowledge base? Is that part of the range of competence of Google? Well, yeah, actually. In this case, one thing to realize is that what Google knows or commands, in some sense, is all the content of the web, the web that we crawl. So if there's some document somewhere that talks about sky color on Mars, then in fact, this happens to be from Wikipedia, but there are documents at NASA do the same thing. Is everything accessible like that? So as you know, there's a bunch of stuff online. We've scanned over 20 million books in Google Books, 400 hours of videos uploaded every minute. There are billions of images. And increasingly, these images are becoming accessible to queries because we have little bots that are basically analyzing them. It says, that's 2 cats and a dog, 3 parrots and a rowboat. It's starting to auto-label these things. So all of a sudden, you can start to find images by their description in ways that go beyond what we had before. And this is interesting because, and we'll come back to this, it's interesting because the fundamentals of what's out there change. The document can stay the same, but the analysis of it, the ability to query it, changes over time. That's a profound shift. An index used to be a fairly static object. You create a catalog, you create an index. That was kind of it, you were done. But that's not true now. We reanalyze and reanalyze and come up with better and deeper interpretations of what's out there. So you might think, are there still difficult questions? Given that the basis on which the knowledge is being indexed and searchable, are there still difficult questions? Let me assure you, we will never be without a job. There are questions like this. What was the population of Japan in 1490? You can probably figure it out, but it's not easily accessible through search. How much does the Empire State Building weigh? Again, I can imagine a world where that's a solvable question. Or how about, why is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea a classic? Or how much apartment housing should San Francisco have? Kind of a policy question. These all lead to the interesting implication of, well, what can you ask? What can you ask when you search? Can you ask this? How many people read that, right? That's actually a completely valid question in the language of Ethiopia, right? So you could actually, if you know how to type this, you can type this into Google and it will give you this search response. Did you know you could do that? There are surprises even within things that you know how to type. So for example, I could ask the question, what is less than, equal, greater than? That may be gibberish to you, but to a certain category of programmers, that's an incredibly useful thing to be able to search because it's the null safe equal operator, okay? So in MySQL and a few other representations, that's a piece of code, it's a symbol in code that I'd love to be able to search for. Interestingly enough, again, 10 years ago, this was not a query that was possible in Google. We did not index those characters, but with improvements in indexing over time, this is now a legal entry in the index. What the index is changes. This has important implications for search mastery. We'll get to that in a little bit. So what can you search? My son comes in one day with this on his arm and says, Dad, do I need to go to the ER for this? How would you know? What would you search for? This is a practical question. This is actually his arm with his actual bite. What do we do? Turns out that bug bites, rashes, things like that are notoriously difficult, even for practiced physicians to search for. So it gets complicated. Now, you know that there's a lot of search by image tools out there. In fact, there are applications you can get for your phone that allows you to identify any mushroom or any plant or whatever with just a picture. This application has 5-star reviews, right? But on the other hand, only people who survive long enough to leave a review give it a review. So there's a huge survivorship bias here. Okay? Deeper point. For you to be a search master, you need to know what's the range of applicability. So yeah, it might work, but you need to know that maybe you shouldn't trust it. The cost of failure is way too high. So in understanding and thinking about what mental models are in the wild, what people, the students have, they will tell you everything is on the web, everything's out there, but 95% of it is crap, but it's extremely variable. Some people understand lots, some people don't understand so much. And that's a huge problem for us as educators. Let me tell you a quick story. So I asked this question to 250 software engineers at Google. Said, here's a picture of a house. I'll tell you the street address. It's in Palo Alto. I want you to find me a picture, an aerial photo of this house taken before 1977. How hard can that be? My mental model says this has got to be trivial. This has got to be fairly straightforward. And yet, 0 software engineers were able to answer this question. I asked mechanical Turkers, 2,000 of them, 1 got it. What is going on here? Why is search so broken? Or why do we not have search masters answering these questions? Because the sad thing is it's actually in Google Books. Nobody thought to search in Google Books. There's a site out there that nobody thought to put the right keywords together to search, find this site. And the surprising solution that everyone should have known about, but nobody thought of except for that one guy, is Google Earth. As you probably know, or are now learning, Google Earth has a historic aerial image archive. And here I've dialed the image back to 1948, which is before 1977. Very nice photograph of it. Why did they not know that? Part of knowing what's possible is fundamental to search mastery. You need to know that there's lots of digital news archives. Google News has this great archive, which is not, does not have heavy overlaps with other ones. So we have, for example, the Afro-American Ledger. If you're doing work on, for example, early Black-owned publishing, you need to know about this resource. You need to be able to have the meta knowledge, the meta skill to be able to search for those repositories that have objects that you care about. So what do we need to know? I want you to be masterful. I want you to be great at this. So, like I said, we need to know what's possible. So let me tell you a quick story about what's possible. This is chapter 2 in my book, the one that Marianne held up. So this is a photograph that someone sent me and said, hey, Dan, you could probably figure out what city this is in, but I need to know what's the phone number of the room where I was standing when I took this photograph. My initial reaction was, this is somebody trolling me. This is crazy hard, right? I thought about it for a while, and if you actually work with what you have, you can actually answer that question, even though it seems crazy impossible. If you search for a TP office building, you see in the upper left corner, it says TP. Yeah, there it is, downtown Warsaw. That was easy, okay? Once I've got that, I can do the image search and very quickly figure out 1416 Varda Street, downtown Warsaw. Right. The question though was, where's the photographer standing? Now, if you look very closely at that photograph, you also need to know that Google Earth has this 3D buildings mode to it. So I can fly to 1416 Varda Street, align the model with the original photograph, and then do what? You can turn around, right? Which is what I did. You turn around and you discover that the building across the street is at Emily Plotter 53. Fabulous. Okay, and we're getting close here, but we don't quite have it. But if you look closely at the photograph, you'll see this kind of blurry image. Reflection. So I flip the reflection around and see it's Google logo. I look at 15, Emily Plotter 53, and there you go. There's the phone number. Okay. Now, I'm not just showing off here. I mean, it's kind of a cool story. But what I want to really you to understand about this is not all search sessions finish in 2 minutes or less, although that's 95% of search sessions. Sometimes you really have to work harder. You can find the answer if you know what resources you can link together. You need to know that Google Earth has a 3D buildings mode, right? You need to know that you can search for images just by doing simple keyword searches. You see, you have to know what's possible and be able to link them together. So sometimes you have to transform that data and you have to understand the space of possibilities. Okay, so let's go back to this. What is possible to find online? What kinds of things do you need to know about? If you're a search master, what do you need to know? You probably don't need to know about the existence of every single database in the world, but you do need to have a good skill about searching for databases. How would you do that? I can tell you the answer later, but do you have the knowledge of how to seek out databases? You need to know, for example, what's indexed. So did you know that events are indexed? We actually have an event analyzer inside of Google that creates an index point for every event that we find that's marked up in a particular way using a schema.org prototype, right? So here's one, for January, these are events coming up. These are all searchable using the construction you see here, jazz concerts near me, right? Did you know that Google patents are searchable? This one, if you type in the patent number, this one happens to be one of mine. You can also, though, find prior art, and there's a host of analytic tools around patents. And if you do patents, it behooves you to become a master of this particular subdomain, this specialty. You can also find related patents by using that tilde construction, tilde patent slash and then the number. So these are all other UAV drone assistance patents that are connected materially to mine. But this is an important point. What you can search for change over time, right? Sometimes dramatically, right? So how do you learn those skills? Here's another story from the book. So I went to this island in the middle of the Greek Aegean Sea. And when I was there, we saw this fabulous stone that had all those graffitis on it, graffiti all over it. And this was told, we were told this is the pediment of the temple of Apollo and Diana on Delos. So the tour guide points this out, and I noticed this thing here that says Captain MC Perry, USN. I thought, what? Is it really that MC Perry? Now, you remember your history, right? MC Perry went to Japan with the US fleet and opened Japan to commerce with the West. Great. So I thought, what are the chances that the same guy who went to Japan with the US Navy would also be in the middle of the Aegean a few years earlier? So if you do the obvious searches, I will spare you a lot of time. You don't get very far. It turns out there's a lot of stuff about him. So how do you actually figure out if he was there at that point in time? I figured what I would do is actually look for the logbook of the USS North Carolina, the ship he was on at those days. I could figure out he was on that ship. Right. And if you use this finding guide, turns out it will find you for you in a library and discover, it will tell you that this is the logbook you need, the USS North Carolina. Fabulous. And oh, by the way, it's at the Hagley Archives in Wilmington, Delaware. I live in California, but nevertheless, next time I was in New York City, I took the train down. And on this kind of chilly winter's day, I went to the Hagley Archives, and they were very kind. They showed me the logbook, and here you go. This is, in fact, if you look in the bottom, near the bottom of that page, says 6789, standing and running alongside the south side of Delos. So, okay. I know he's on the ship. I know they're in Delos. They're next to it. Did they actually get off the boat? The logbook is silent on this. So, you know, that's cool and all, but it doesn't actually close the case. So what do I do? Well, I discover, continuing my research, that there are 2 other copies of the logbook, including one at the Library of Congress Archives. So, true story, next time I came to Maryland, I went to their archive reading room and I asked, and that's my desk there in the center, I asked to see the logbook. And the logbook, it turns out that each ship of the line of those days would have a copy of the logbook. I thought, okay, great. So I requisitioned the logbook, looked at it, and it's a copy. You know, this is actually the picture. And if you look at them side by side, they're 99% the same. Okay, fine. Did they get off the damn boat? I'm sitting there dejectedly, and the archivist walks by and says, oh, did you think about the letters? What letters? There's no letters in the index. And he points out that you have to know that ships in those days would make copies, fair copies of every letter that went off the boat, because mail was really unreliable. And so they make, before they sent them off, they would make a copy. So you can actually ask for the non-indexed letters that of course you would know, because of course 19th century scholars would know this. I didn't know it. So bless his heart, this is a letter from the captain to his wife, Minerva, who lived in DC at the time. And look at the bottom. Here's the translation. Yeah, yes, I learned how to read that. That's a different, another story. But that's actually just regular old handwriting. And if you look there, look at the bottom. This is a letter home. I have at this time on board the North Carolina as many relics of one kind or another as would load 10 wagons, and among them number 2 white marble altars from the temples of Apollo and Diana at Delos. Not only were they there, but they committed archaeological vandalism. Okay, so this is great. I got the smoking gun. I know that they actually stole stuff from that temple, and it's very likely that MC Perry left his mark there. So there's a lot of things to point out in this lesson about using double quotes and finding it and so on. But for today, I just want to point out that when a senior archivist tells you something, listen. When the librarian comes to offer help, they might know something. I had never heard about the fair copy letters that every ship had at the time, but the archivist did. And I was able to requisition them, even though they're not technically in the index. So not everything's on the web. Sometimes you actually have to go to the library. So I want to switch topics here for a second. We've been telling stories about needing what you need to know, what's possible, and so on. But I want to tell you one last story here about what people know and what they don't know. So I was doing a study a few years ago, and I was interviewing this young woman, actually about a mile from Apple headquarters. And one of the things that really impressed me about this is she clearly did not know how to find text in a page, on a web page. Now, you and I know that if you're on a Mac, it's Command F, and on a PC, it's Control F. It's the same thing. It finds text on the page, right? So I was struck by this, and so I did a quick study asking people to go to this web page and find me how long it took Beth Smith to run this race. You and I would go Control F, type Beth Smith, boom, answer, right? Well, here's the result, okay? When you ask a bunch of people this question, and it says in this chart, N is 85, but trust me, N is now about 300. Doesn't matter. All it does is smooth the chart out. Once you get beyond like 10, 15, 20 seconds there, all of a sudden there's a huge tail of people who have clearly no idea how to do this. What's more, once you get out beyond 120 seconds, a quarter of all the answers are wrong. And that puzzled me for a while until I started watching people as they were actually answering the question. And I found that people who don't know Control F don't know Control C, Control V, copy paste. They were trying to remember the answer, and they would come back to my little form and type in the number and like swap 2 digits or something. What? I'm sorry. Isn't this like mother's milk? Wasn't everyone taught this in elementary school? Answer, no. Survey, 12,000 English internet users, 90% do not know this. Do not know Control F. 90%. That means I bet there's somebody out there who doesn't, on this call, who does not know how to use Control F. I have explained how to use Control F to, shall we say, senior computer scientists in well-known institutions. Doesn't matter how you do this. I've done this study now dozens of times, thousands of people. It always comes back 90%. English users, so on. On Firefox, it's 93%. I don't know why Firefox is slightly higher, whatever. Why does this matter? First off, if you give people questions like, very searchable questions like, where is the altar stone at Stonehenge believed to come from? That's a simple enough question. Well, people who don't know Control F have a tougher time with that. So we ran another big study with 1,900 people, and we found this. Now, the thing you want to look at here is the very bottom line, Dan's Control F. This is a 15-second video teaching people how to use Control F. So the intervention is a 15-second video. Here, participant, please watch this video. Watch video. It turns out that going to the left, experiments that are to the left are better, that is faster, more accurate than ones to the right. So bottom line is that if you put somebody in this experimental condition, they're 12% faster. 12% faster, that is an enormous amount of time. That's a huge difference. We would kill to get like 1 or 2%, but all of a sudden now I'm almost free giving you 12% and increased accuracy. So there's a lot to know here. So for example, one of the things search masters know is the different kinds of conventions and different kinds of media objects that are searchable. So here's a partial list of all that stuff. Home pages, bookmark pages, calls for papers, blah, 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 blah. But you know about spoof sites, right? Well, you might have seen this spoof site. There are a lot of students every year who write papers about tree octopus. Trust me, this is a spoof site. There is no such animal. Or this one, the dihydrogen monoxide fact file. This is another spoof site. Somehow people didn't get this. And in fact, the city of Aliso Viejo in LA County tried to ban importation of dihydrogen monoxide. Deeply embarrassing, right? The point here is that if you don't know such sites exist, you will be surprised when you run across them and can't identify them. So another thing that changes a lot is different kinds of content. So I mentioned before, in YouTube video space alone, every minute, 400 hours of content are being uploaded. That's a lot of content. Here's a big newsflash. That's going to get more. That's going to go up in the next couple of years. Currently it's 400 hours. Prediction, in 2 years, it's going to be 800 hours per minute, okay? That means there's a lot going on. It's also worth noting, teachers, that a lot of students are going to YouTube to learn stuff, because we know roughly a third of all views are for learning. Take that into consideration for a second. What's important for all of us, I think, is that we need to learn how to ask questions and evaluate this content, because YouTube videos are just another source of information. But learning how to evaluate the sources is important. Now, this is one of those things that people talk about all the time. You need to evaluate critically the quality of the resource. Okay, student says, how do I do that? Let's talk about it. So here's a website, usareally.com. Okay. What should you think about this? Somebody sends you a link to a paper or an article that's there. Should you take it as read, that this is accurate and correct? So let's figure out what is the story with usareally.com. How do we do that? Here's one way to deal with it. You search for the URL. You don't visit the URL, right? Because they will make the usual, propaganda. We are great, we are accurate, we are unbiased. But if you search for the URL, you can start to find other places that talk about it. And the real pattern to know is searching for the website, usareally.com, and then -site colon the URL. What does that do? That gives you people commenting on that site or about that site. See what I mean? So here now, we can start to see lots of results talking about USA Really. And the number one there is Bellingcat, which is a well-known debunking investigative reporting site. This is a great way to get into information about a site without getting information from the site. That's what the -site colon is. Somebody sends me this and says, Dan, this is a really strange, I don't know what the EPA is doing. It's so weird. So we look at this, EPAFacts.com. Initially, my spider sense is going off because I'm thinking, wait, isn't the EPA a .gov site? Right? But if you are not skilled in the dark arts, you may not recognize that all government entities need to be .gov. Okay. So if you look at this, is sort of a lot of anti-EPA articles. What's going on here? So if you look at the About page, it says EPA Facts Project, Environmental Policy Alliance. Okay, spider sense number 2 is going off. Like, why is it that? Why isn't it environmental protection something? Notice how similar the logos are to EPA.gov and EPAFacts.com. So clearly something's going on here. So if you look at the street address for EPAFacts.com, it's Environmental Policy Alliance at 1910 Vermont Avenue, Northwest. Right? Cool. I didn't know the EPA could fit into one suite, but hey, maybe that's possible. Reduced government. But if you look up that same street address, and this is sort of a trick, right, for validating sources, look up the street address. Hey, look at that. There's a company that is they're in the same suite. What? Yeah. So it's easy then to go look up the real Environmental Protection Agency and discover their address, or to look up Berman and Company and figure out what's going on there. And it's pretty clear that they're a lobbying firm that happens to be on Vermont Avenue. That makes sense. It makes more sense than if they were an arm of the federal government. Now, my colleague Sam Weinberg at Stanford pointed out that 80% of students cannot do this, right? They analyzed 7,800 pieces of work and discovered that the people were basically terrible at this. So in fact, Sarah McGrew was involved in this work as well, right? So there's somebody there on campus who knows this work incredibly well. So there's all kinds of stuff going on here, but people are just not good at this. This is what part of what search mastery needs to be. So let me wrap up. So search mastery is many things, but understanding the space of information available, knowing how to search through it, work through it, knowing conventions. These are all part of what it means to be a master. But I mentioned earlier that a meta skill is important. Because search capabilities change all the time, you need to re-up your knowledge. You need to revalidate your skills. You need to to hone that knife of insight so you can be good at it. So, but even in this, you have to be careful. So here, for example, I did a query for new Google search features. I thought, I'm going to check up on this. I'm going to figure out what's going on. Now, this is what shows up. Now, I'm paying attention, and I think, wait a second, didn't the logo change? See in the upper left corner of this slide, the Google logo is sans serif. That image is a serif font. Oh, what's going on here? Well, when you actually look at the article, it's from 2005. Trust me, anything that's more than a couple years old is out of date and stale, okay? So what you should be doing is doing a search like that for new Google search features, or Bing or whatever, and date range your results so that you can say just for the past year and get results that are actually up to date. You see, those are all timestamped now. So these are all within the past 6 months. This is the kind of search you should be doing, not just an open-ended search that searches across all archives and time. One of the things you'll find is that Google Lens on the phone has some new capabilities you might want to know about. Now, you probably already know how to solve this quadratic equation, right? So this is actually a picture off of my notepad where I wrote down that equation. I took a photograph of it, highlighted it, and said, okay, solve this. And it gives me the symbolic worked out expression, how to do this. That's a whole new capability, and it's going to drive high school algebra teachers insane. But you see where this is going. Our ability to do things like identification, like of this green heron. I saw it standing on the dock, took a photograph of it. I invoke Google Lens and say, what is that? And it says, oh, that's a green heron. Right. Now, what you should be thinking is it really a green heron? How accurate is this? So you would want to check, right? And check carefully. It turns out it actually is a green heron. So that's pretty cool. But understand the range of applicability. Does it work for everything? Does it work for trees? Probably. Will it work for leaves? Leaves are hard. It's important for you to understand what will work and what won't work. So, for example, do not use this for mushrooms, please. Right? Bad idea. So what we need to do, what Google and search engine providers need to do, is to design for information systems that help you be an informant, a literate consumer and searcher of information. What we need to do as instructors, as faculty, is teach all of our students all of this stuff. And that's, in some sense, what search mastery is all about. So I'm super happy that the whole search mastery effort is going on now. And as I think Mary Ann mentioned at the beginning, I've had this course online now for a while, which is now on edX, but we did this fabulous study where basically what you want to look at is the red line is students coming in. During the middle 2 weeks there, students get better. And then after the class, they immediately start forgetting. And this the black line there, they start forgetting. But they, in long term, are twice as good as when they came into the class. As a teacher, this warms my heart. This is like the best chart ever. Not only are they learning while in class, but they persistently use that knowledge afterwards. So these stories and many more are all in my book, The Joy of Search. So it's available at many fine bookstores and websites all around the world. So the bottom line, though, I think of this talk and of Joy of Search and Search Mastery is that you need to know how to do this. It's part of your job. It's part of your life. And these kinds of skills will carry you going forward. You need the skills, and we need everybody to be able to think about and be able to answer this question. What will you do to achieve search mastery? What's your plan of action? What will you do next? Okay, so that's my ending slide, ending research. This is all in the video, so you can go check it out. Okay.
Brian,
All right.
We have a.
Brian, I was
Go
just
ahead,
going to say,
Mary.
I'll turn it over to you to see if there are questions.
Okay, so we have a couple people that have asked questions in chat, but also people, if you'd like to ask a question verbally, feel free to raise your hand and I'm calling you. Ryan asks, kind of how do you get people to care about search and search mastery? In particular, he's wondering, do you have any stories of strategies that you've used to hook learners that you can share that kind of get them excited about this as opposed to teaching them how to do it?
That is a good question, because it's essential to hook these people. So typically when I give my classes, the very first thing I do is to give them a problem. Okay, class, let's start. What bird is this? Go. And I let them sort of flounder around for a little bit. And basically, I try to start with an opening, compelling question. And then I say, hey, here's something you can use, search my image, for example, to solve that problem. Now, let's do another problem in that vein. So there's the initial hook, then there's a secondary backup, which is another problem, which they know they couldn't have done without using this technique. So it's a 1-2 punch, basically. That's what I do. And there's also a lot of other questions. It's not just the search by image one. That's the most compelling because it's the most visual. But if I have, for example, a bunch of patent lawyers, I'm going to ask them a patent question I know they can't answer without knowing something. So it basically lays bare the need to know, and then I want to fill that void.
Wayne Letters had a relatively elaborated question, so I've given him the ability to talk. So Wayne, if you could unmute and ask your question.
Hey, you bet. Thanks, Brian, and thanks, Dan. Really interesting recount. So a question about motivation, following up on Ryan's question for what drives someone to learn this.
Yep.
Is audio coming through?
You're great.
Hey, all right. So a decade or so ago, there was significant research on personal information management, right? So this is how do I order my stuff, my photos, my notes, my annotations, my marginalia, all that stuff. So a question like, have I taken a photo of a green heron before? Did I share it with anyone? So one could argue that in the time in between, things have gotten a lot more complex, right? We're distributed across multiple devices, multiple hosts, different apps. They all have different histories. So is this a solved problem? By moving most stuff to the cloud, all search is now standardized and identical. Searching my photos and searching Flickr is universal. Or is this a problem surrendered? We don't kind of do this anymore.
Yeah, so I contributed to that literature, so I know exactly whereof you speak. So I think personal information management is better and worse simultaneously. So for example, I manage all my photos using Google Photos. You can use Amazon, you can use Apple, whatever. But the ability to search over that information space alone is really tremendous. So for example, I can go to Google Photos and say, show me Katie, my daughter, with cat, and I'll look at all the pictures of her holding her cat, all 400 of them since she was born. So that's a kind of query that was not possible before. Structuring things in the cloud, with Google Docs and so on, all those kinds of things, I think make a lot of those problems easier. As far as I can tell, though, a lot of personal information management is not so much whether or not we've got the tools and technology for doing it. It's whether or not you as an individual have the discipline to actually do whatever the tools are going to help you do. So that's one thing. The second thing is the tools change all the time, and that's a problem, right? So for example, I used to use Picasa. Picasa's long gone. Oh, then I used to use a different one, right? And so I've gone through like probably a dozen different photo organizers, and I hate the fact that every 2 years I have to shift photo organizers. So I'm glad that Google Photos has stood up for now for what, 10 years or something. So personal information breaks down into there are lots of different kinds of things. I don't think the research is done by a long shot, but I do think you need kind of era of stability. So personally, I use Google Photos for my photos. All my text, and so for example, my work notes and everything are all in flat files because I can always take flat files forward, right? Yeah, they're in the cloud and they're searchable and all that stuff, but they're basically, there's nothing magic about it. But it's an interesting question, because I think there's a huge possibility, huge potential for work in this area. We're not done there at all.
Thanks.
I'm going to kind of collapse a couple questions. There have been a whole bunch of questions, or several questions in chat that are really focused around the question of search for supporting civil discourse. Do we have an understanding of how people are searching when they're looking for political information? How does this relate to mis and disinformation? And so I guess, what are your thoughts on kind of a more, what do we know about this, and are there things that could be done or might be done to change the way we have political discourse?
Yeah, we actually know a fair bit about it. I will tell you, it's really hard because political queries look a lot like non-political queries, and so it's in fact a very fine line between it's very hard, for example, to write a classifier. It's very simple if it contains the term QAnon, no problem. Or in fact, conspiracy and fringe theories are fairly easy to classify, but run-of-the-mill things are much harder unless there's a specifically political term in it. So so that's hard. But I think you're actually interested in slight variation on that. One of which is, how can I search for different kinds of political documents online within a particular subspace? So for example, could I search in Fox News? Yes, you can by using Site Operator. Same thing for New York Times, same thing for Telegraph. So there's easy way to scope the range of your query. And you can even do something like build a custom search engine, which would then join all these different resources together. So I could have, for example, a conservative custom search engine, which would search only through conservative news sites, or a liberal one, or whatever, right? You can create those. They're fairly straightforward. So what you would search for is Google custom search engine, and learn how to do that. But then the other aspect of this is, well, what should Google be doing? What should all of the platforms be doing with respect to returning results with respect to political queries? And as you know, that's very fraught, it's very up for grabs these days. So I do know we've got a big effort about trying to return and label things that we know are overtly wrong, right? So bogus medical theories, medical conspiracies, and so on. So 5G queries tend to get labeled. 5Gs plus vaccine tend to get labeled with caution. We're doing some of that kind of stuff. I don't know if I got exactly the median of your question, but it's not a simple question.
Yeah. Well, and then again, I want to be sensitive to the time. It's 1 o'clock. So we have a few other questions, but I thought what we do is, Marianne, why don't you wrap things up? And then if Dan, I don't know, do you have another 10 or 15 minutes for people that want to continue to talk?
I have 7.5.
Okay.
I have a 10-15 meeting, yeah.
Got it. Well, then probably what I would suggest is, Marianne, why don't you wrap things up? And Dan, if I'm sure you'd be willing to talk to people in email if they have questions. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. And at some point, I'll come back to Maryland.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. That was super interesting talk. It was riveting. It was really great, and the photographs were good too, and the examples from your book were wonderful. So so we're glad you were here. And for the participants, I want to thank you all for attending the speaker series. And we have another one scheduled on February 8th. It'll be at the same time and kind of place. And that's Joel Chan from the University of Maryland. Will be talking about empowering scholars and scientists to access research literature, to better access their research literature. especially exploring socio-technical solutions. So we'll have an announcement on that with the invitation and the link closer to the date. So keep an eye out for that. And then in the meantime, you guys, if you have questions for the Search Mastery Interest Group or about the Search Mastery Interest Group, you can email me, and my address is there, but I'm Mary Ann Francis, and I'm in the University of Maryland directory, so you can find me that way. So that's it. Thanks again, Dan. It was
Hey,
great.
thank you. Thank you so much. This was fun.